The history of the Xenoblade Chronicles universe is no doubt a long and complex one that can be quite hard to understand even if you played both games. In this video, I want to attempt to explain some different interpretations of the timeline, as there are certain elements that different people disagree on. Specifically, there are two main different versions I will be talking about in this video. Of course, before I proceed, I have to be clear, there are going to be massive spoilers in this video for both Xenoblade 1 and 2, and I will not be covering Xenoblade X, as of now, we have no idea if it is connected to the other games in the series. With that being said, welcome to the video, it's Linkalot here, and I hope you enjoy. Now, no matter which of the two interpretations I'm going to cover in this video you agree with, the Xenoblade timeline always starts in one place, and that is with the discovery of the Conduit. Now, the Conduit is an extremely important object in the Xenoblade universe, and it's going to come up time and time again in this video, so it's important that we understand its origins. Now, the Conduit was a strange rectangular object discovered sometime in the 20th century in Africa. The year it was discovered was described as being 20XX AD, so sometime in the 20th century. It was discovered at a lake in Africa. At the time, its functions were not understood by the people who discovered it, but from what they did understand about the object, they labelled it as being magnetic abnormal matter, whatever that means, which honestly I'm not even sure. After research, many strange qualities about the object came to light. Apparently, it was found to in fact be a perpetual motion machine that seemingly went against the fundamental rules of the universe. Many people soon became aware of the strange object, most notably a large organisation known as the Unified Government, who currently held control over planet Earth. They launched a great institution responsible for monitoring the artifact further, naming it OADOS. One of the things this institution did was construct 3 large space elevators, also known as beanstalks, on different places around the planet. The first tower, Rhadamanthus, the second tower, Acus, and the third tower, Minos, and I'm sorry if I butchered any of those pronunciations. The Conduit specifically was housed in the first tower, Rhadamanthus. A massive, circular orbital ring was also made to connect these 3 towers, stretching all the way across the planet. At some point during this period of time, a great supercomputer was also built, which ran on a trio of artificial intelligences known as the Trinity Processor. This artificial intelligence was responsible for protecting the orbital ring and the Conduit, consciously creating large war robots known as artifices to protect the structures from any potential damage, the largest and most powerful of which being known as Ion. These artifices received power from the Conduit. But why exactly did the Conduit need protecting? Well, as it turned out, many groups of people disagreed with the Unified Government's ownership over the object, seeing it as rightfully theirs instead. One such group, and perhaps the most substantial, was known as the Saviorite Rebels. This all came to a head during one climactic showdown between the Artifices and the Saviorites, during which a man known as Klaus did something never before attempted. In a moment of desperation, he defected and locked out the other scientists from utilising Ion's power, which would have destroyed all of the Saviorites. Instead, fearing for the future of mankind, as wars raged on the already ravaged planet below, he activated the Conduit, praying that it would change the world. What happens next is rather hazy, and this is the series of events that some people disagree on. Generally, people think one of two things. They think that either this experiment with the Conduit created tons of new universes, or they think that it merely linked our universe to many other universes which already existed. Now, I will put on the two timelines on the screen right now, and these are the two different ones I think could be the case. Personally, I favour the second one. I think that what really happened was that, for the most part, the activation of the conduit merely opened gateways between many pre-existing universes. But I don't think this was the case for all of them. I think in one scenario, the Trinity processor went rogue and created a sort of pocket dimension. Now, the reason it did this was most likely to save two scientists who were in the room when the conduit was activated, Klaus, who I've already discussed, and another scientist known as Galea. Now, what happened to Klaus specifically is extremely interesting, and is the cause of many of the events of the Xenoblade timeline, and I'll cover that later. But basically, it seems that the Trinity processor consciously made a decision to create a new sort of pocket dimension, or maybe it was a simulation running on its AI, so that these two people, or rather their spirits, could continue to exist. Why exactly it did this is unclear. But what of Earth? Well, it seems that the numerous portals which opened across the planet, linking it to other dimensions, stripped all matter from the planet, making it appear bare. That was almost all matter, however. This matter was then transported to many other pre-existing universes. We don't really know what became of the majority of this matter. Anyway, if you remember, I said all the matter, and technically that's not quite true, because there were a handful of people who clung to life, and they eventually become what are known as Goldos in the Xenoblade 2 universe, and I'll cover them in more detail later in this video. For now though, all you need to know is that upon the activation of the conduit, many portals appeared, linking our world to others. Through these portals, almost all of matter on Earth was sucked away, stripped away, making the planet appear completely barren and lifeless. Now, if you remember what I said about Klaus and Galea, their case was different. They were transported, and only them specifically, to a new world created by the Trinity processor. This is the world of Xenoblade Chronicles 1, and it's an extremely fascinating one. It seems that, upon first arriving here, they were greeted with an seemingly unending expanse of endless ocean. It seems that they existed merely as spirits for a while. They couldn't do or create anything. This was, however, until something followed them through the portal. Ontos, one of the cores of the Trinity processor. Now, in Xenoblade 2, it's described as having triggered a space-time transition event, and it's kind of unclear whether Ontos went with them right at the creation of this universe, or whether he appeared later. In the game, it kind of sounds like he appeared later, which is why I think there was probably a period of time in which Klaus and Galea, or Zanza and Meynef, as they were now known as, existed merely as spirits. Anyway, upon his arrival, Zanza and Meynef now had the ability to create. Specifically to do this, Ontos, also known as Alvis, granted them Monados, and these Monados were sort of keys that they could use to tap into his power. Using this power, they created the two Titans, which were colossal bodies they could use to house their spirits until the end of time. It's important to note, however, that neither Zanza nor Meynef were aware that their power was really sourced from Ontos. I am a huge fan of the analogy that Zanza and Meynef are basically users of the computer that is Alvis, and the Monados, their keys, are really their passwords to allow them to access the computer's power. It's a little confusing, but I think it's bloody dang awesome. However, in this new, endless world, Zanza and Meynef were lonely. So they both created life. First of all, Meynef created a race of intelligent mechanical life known as the Machina. Zanza, on the other hand, didn't create intelligent life. Instead, he created a species known as Telethia. Telethia were beasts created from his very cells, or alternatively the cells of the BIONIS. They have no intelligence, and their sole purpose is to destroy all life on Bionis whenever Zanza decrees it. It is known that sometime after Zanza's creation of the Telethia, he bestowed intelligence upon them, although it is stated in the game that this was a mistake really, that he never intended to do this. In doing so, he created two new forms of life, both descendants from the original Telethia, and these were the Hyentia and the Giants. The one key difference between the Hyentia and the Giants was surprisingly not their appearance. Instead, it was the fact that the Hyentia possessed a gene, which meant that when they were exposed to high levels of ether, they would revert back to their original form as a Telethia. Giants, on the other hand, for whatever reason, did not possess this gene, meaning they could never revert back to a Telethia. And so, after these events, life continued seemingly peacefully for many eras. The Hyentia constructed a grand city on the Bionis which they named Alchemoth, and the Mechona did as well, constructing their grand city which they named Agniratha. However, all would not remain so civil and comfortable forever. This all began when the inhabitants of the two Titans began discussing the possibility of departing from their worlds, in an effort to discover new, distant lands. Zanza feared this. This is because his very existence was dependent on people continuously dying on the Bionis, which provided the Titan, and thus Zanza himself, with the ether he needed to stay alive. Moreover, the people of Bionis were seemingly forgetting about him, ceasing to worship the god they once so admired. For these reasons, Zanza brought about a great and terrible plan to restore the order he witnessed slipping away, more and more, day by day. One of the first things Zanza did to bring about his plan was appointing himself 3 disciples, Dixon, Lorothea, and Alvis. Now, if you remember Alvis from earlier, it's important to note that Zanza was not aware of Alvis's true intentions and his true form. And this group of disciples were known as the Trinity, which it's confusing, but you need to remember this Trinity has no connection to the Trinity processor, it's a mere coincidence. The next thing Zanza did was plant his soul into the Monado, and then plant the Monado in a specific location on the Bionis' shoulder. He then willed a giant known as ALREST to pick up the sword, who, when doing so, became possessed by Zanza. It was ALREST, possessed by Zanza, who took control of the Bionis and attacked the MECHONIS, attempting to destroy the Titan and in the process destroy Meyneth, who was the only one who could stop him from achieving his goal. On that day, many Mechona were unfortunately slain, with Zanza also directing a horde of Telethia towards Agniratha. However, all was not yet lost, as Meyneth too took control of her Titan and began battle with Zanza. This battle waged on, with both of their life forces depleting, until both dealt a devastating blow to the other. Taking advantage of Meyneth's final blow to the Bionis, its inhabitants took ALREST, Zanza's physical body, which also contained a remnant of his soul, and sealed him firmly away in a floating landmass named Prison Island. They also sealed away the Monado, which contained what remained of Zanza's soul, in Ose Tower on Valak Mountain. Meyneth soon entered a deep slumber, as the battle had greatly weakened her soul. But, before she did so, she warned the surviving Mechona that Zanza had not yet been destroyed, and that one day he would return. It is for this reason that Egil, one of the Mechona, constructed the Mechon in an attempt to consume all life on Bionis, thereby preventing Zanza from ever accumulating enough ether to reawaken. However, Zanza still had one last trick up his sleeve. His disciples lived, and could therefore help him to reawaken. And so, the disciple Dixon took on a human form and planned an expedition, along with a team of Homs, to Ose Tower, where the Monado was being kept. The Homs were another race of intelligent life Zanza created at some point. It's unclear when and why exactly Zanza ever made them. Maybe he was running low on ether and needed more organisms which could supply him with it perhaps? Anyway, upon coming across the Monado, Zanza triggered some kind of anomaly which killed all of the expedition team. He then chose a corpse at random, that of a small boy named Shulk, and planted his soul into the child, who Dixon then took home and raised, subtly carrying out the steps needed for Zanza to truly reawaken without Shulk ever knowing. Okay, so pretty much everything after this point is the events of Xenoblade Chronicles 1, so I'm not really going to talk about it, other than the most important moments which concern Zanza and Meynef. This is because there are already tons of videos out there on this site explaining the plot in great detail, and I don't want this video to come out super long, which it already looks like it's going to anyway, to be honest. Anyway, I hope this is okay with you guys, because you need to remember I'm going to talk about Xenoblade 2 as well, and I just don't want it to take forever. During a climactic showdown between Shulk and Egil at MECHONIS core, Zanza's plan is finally accomplished. Dixon shoots Shulk in the back, killing him, after he disobeyed Zanza's wish of murdering Egil. After doing so, Zanza's spirit leaves Shulk's body, and similarly, Meynef's spirit leaves Fiora's body, and does battle with a now fully strengthened Zanza. Sadly, Zanza is ultimately victorious, killing Meynef and therefore destroying the MECHONIS in its entirety. He takes her Monado before warping away to Prison Island, where he begins a process which will release high levels of ether. This reverts the High Entia to their original form as a Telethia, ready for the destruction and rebirth of all life as Zanza plans. During this period of time, as Zanza prepares for the recycling of BIONIS, Alvis connects with Shulk in a sort of dream world. It is this connection that revives Shulk and allows him to exist outside the predetermined path Zanza had him set on, eventually harnessing all of Alvis's power as a Monado, so powerful that it is capable of killing gods, and therefore Zanza. And so, Shulk defeats Zanza, and Alvis makes Shulk a new god, able to also utilize the conduit's power. Doing so, he wishes for a world with no gods, essentially resetting his universe and creating an entirely new one. This is where the Xenoblade 1 branch of the timeline ends, other than the events of Future Connected. That was one of two branching universes that the Xenoblade timeline is constructed out of. Now we must return back to Earth, on the other branch of the timeline, after the conduit has just stripped all of the matter from the planet. Following the conduit experiment, after Klaus's body and soul was split into two halves, with his other half being Zanza from the Xenoblade 1 universe, he was left, alone, to govern a now barren and lifeless Earth. With nothing else to do, he set about restoring the planet with life, utilizing the conduit's power, becoming known as the Architect. One of the first things he created was the Cloud Sea, a huge blanket of clouds, beneath which was an enormous ocean which covered the planet, obscuring the landmasses beneath. Its purpose was to disassemble matter and reconstruct it into the image of all the things that once made up Earth. The Architect then gathered minute devices from what remained of the planet, which contained data on all of its previous life forms. He then scattered them across the cloud sea. Many eons later, these would become to be known as the core crystals by the denizens of ALREST, which was the new name of the planet. Also, these devices bonded with the particulate reconstructors of the cloud sea, forming the nuclei of new organic life. Over the next thousands of years, these nuclei developed into tiny creatures known as titans, which took on many different forms. Some were humanoid and others more animalistic in appearance. These eventually grew to gargantuan sizes over countless generations, eventually becoming so unbelievably large that entire civilizations sprung up on their bodies. They would also, using the data from their core crystals, give birth to other forms of life, with these life forms living on the Titans themselves. However, the architect was understandably a cautious man after what had become of the planet, due to his foolishness of activating the conduit. And so, in an effort to ensure that the new races of humans wouldn't repeat ancient humanity's mistakes, he implemented one final measure: the blades. These were synthetic, technological beings which inhabited the core crystals he scattered across the planet. They would awaken when somebody resonated with their core crystal, serving them from that point on. These people who resonated with blades were known as drivers. The blades did not age, injure, or die, and would simply return to their cores to be awakened by another driver if their current one were to die, although they would lose all of their memories. Their true purpose, although unknown to the inhabitants of ALREST at that time, was to accumulate data about the state of the world and humanity. This accumulated data was then relayed to the two managers of the blades, high in the space station alongside Klaus, Logos and Pneuma, two of the cores of the Trinity processor. Based on this data, Logos and Pneuma would then relay new evolutionary code back to the core crystals of the blades, allowing them to evolve into more efficient and useful beings. There was once actually 3 of these processors, but the last one, Ontos, triggered a space-time transition event long ago and arrived in the Xenoblade 1 universe, being known as ALREST there. It's also worth noting that the inhabitants of ALREST were not aware of Klaus or the space station or tower he resided in, as an enormous tree had sprung up around said tower. For whatever reason, they believed that a fabled paradise called Elysium existed at the top of it, and that at the beginning of their universe, they were cast out and left to find the Titans. These blades, too, would eventually become Titans over time, continuing the cycle. This was the new circle of life that the architect had created. Before I go on, there's one thing I forgot to mention, and I'll talk about it here. As I mentioned earlier, there were in fact a very select few people who somehow survived the conduit's activation, remaining on the planet. They were left on the now barren Earth, believing themselves to be alone, until one day they discovered the core crystals. In an attempt to attain immortality after their world was brought to ruin, they performed horrific experiments in which they tried to replace their brain cells with core crystals, turning them into horrific monsters known as Guldo. Now, they forever inhabit a ghostly, long-forgotten city of the old world, known as Moritha, far below the Cloud Sea, with nobody knowing it even exists. Back to the present, the 2 cores of the Trinity processor were both stored in core crystals shaped after the conduit. One day, a man known as Amalthus attempted to scale the world tree and surprisingly succeeded, doing it all in an effort to find his creator and search for meaning in a world he saw as unholy and wicked. He never came across Klaus, but he did, however, come across the 2 Trinity processor cores. Taking them both, he descended the tree and returned to his home titan of the Inderline Praetorium. For what happens next, it's important to understand that the personality and aspirations of a blade are always based off of their driver. Amalthus chose to activate Logos, and since he was a man angry at the injustice in the world, longing for a better one, The blade who emerged was cruel, hateful, and determined to destroy ALREST. Malos. Malos named himself the Aegis, based on the artifact that one of the leaders of the Underline Praetorium acquired that was supposedly a divine revelation from the architect himself. Malos, in a fit of rage, destroyed the artifact, claiming that he was born from divinity and that therefore he was the Aegis. But Malos was not like the other blades. As one of the cores of the Trinity processor, he had complete control over the artifices that were used so long ago to combat the Saviorites, as well as having his own Monado. Using these powers, he did something unheard of from any regular blade and left Amalthus of his own accord, setting out on a mission to destroy all life as Amalthus secretly wished. And so, he sunk many great titans, destroying entire civilizations and killing millions of innocents in the process. Amalthus, horrified at what he had done, wanted to awaken the other Trinity processor core to go against Malos, but he realized he couldn't have more than one blade, and so set out to find a different driver for the second core. Eventually, he comes across a prince known as Adam Origo from the Torna Titan, who successfully resonates with the core, producing another Aegis known as Mithra. And so, for 2 terrible years, the 2 Aegises clashed, resulting in the unfortunate demise of even more Titans. Eventually, during a climactic showdown above the Torna Titan, Mithra loses control of her powers and successfully defeats Malos, although the nation of Torna is lost in the process. This horrifies her so much that she retreats inwards into her own subconscious, using the conduit's power to create a new form she can hide behind. A new blade who is everything she isn't and wants so desperately to be. A new blade known as Pyra. Following the destruction of the Torna Titan, Adam takes the true Aegis sword, which appeared during Mithra's final confrontation with Malos, and seals it in a temple deep underground the Letharian archipelago, awaiting the day when her new driver will discover it. He also takes Pyra or Mithra's body and seals it deep in the bowels of an ancient ship he sinks beneath the Cloud Sea. However, Malos was not truly dead. As a blade, and an Aegis at that, he couldn't simply be killed like a human. True, his battle against Mithra had greatly weakened him, but he still lived. And so for the next 500 years he gradually recovered, biding his time until he would be powerful enough to confront Mithra again, hopefully killing her successfully this time. This would leave him free to destroy ALREST completely, with nobody to stop him. During these years of waiting, he would construct a terrorist organization named after the fallen Torna Titan, who were, like him, also devoted to destroying the other Aegis and consequently ending all life. So everything from this point is the events of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and like I did with Xenoblade Chronicles 1, I'm not going to go over the events in great detail. I'm just going to talk about the things that happen that are most crucial to the overarching Xenoblade timeline. One day, a boy named Rex becomes enrolled in an organization led by Torna to recover the ancient ship holding Pyra's body, with him not being aware of this mission's true purpose. During this mission, he comes across her body and touches her corresponding sword, unknowingly resonating with her core crystal. As he does so, a man known as Jin stabs him through the heart, killing him on the behalf of Malos. He awakens in a sort of dream world in which Pyra brings him back to life on the request that he takes her to Elysium, a fabled utopia which is said to exist at the top of the World Tree, a great tree located at the centre of ALREST. She wants to go there to ask the architect what her purpose was. Was she, like Malos seemingly was, created to eliminate all life? If this were the case, she wanted to beg her creator to let her die. Not telling Rex this, he agrees, and becomes her driver. In the coming days and weeks, the two would attempt to reach the World Tree, during which Pyra reveals her true form as Mithra in a moment of desperation against Malos, who is, like before, determined to kill her. Soon, both Mithra and Malos will become powerful enough to transform into their true forms. These will more similar to their corresponding cores of the Trinity processor, with Mithra becoming Numa, now with complete control over the artifices. Finally, after coming across the architect at the top of a world tree, Malos takes control of the most powerful artifice, Ion, and begins to use it to destroy the world in its entirety. However, Numa and Rex arrive just in time to stop him, defeating him after a challenging battle. This battle specifically takes place at the exact same time Shulk is battling Zanza on the Xenoblade Chronicles 1 branch of the timeline, meaning that when he kills Zanza, his other side, being Klaus, and thus the Architect, also dies. His death is important as it means that the Conduit, the source of Numa's powers, disappears, as it had been tied to his life force. Using what remained of the Conduit's power, Numa took control of the Artifice Ion and uses it to obliterate the World Tree, preventing it from collapsing on top of ALREST, but she sacrifices herself in the process. As Rex and the others escape, Klaus too uses the last of the Conduit's power in his final moments, removing the Cloud Sea and causing the Titans to merge with Earth's ancient land masses. And with that, the Xenoblade timeline comes to an end. The most important thing to understand here, above all else, is that both Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 are taking place at the exact same time, with each world being home to a specific half of Klaus. In Xenoblade 1 it is Zanza, and in the second game it is the Architect. Both games are also home to specific cores of the Trinity processor. Xenoblade 1 has Ontos, and Xenoblade 2 has Logos and Numa, in the form of Malos and Pyra, or Mithra. All of this is a result of the Conduit's great and mysterious power to warp reality itself. It is all the result of one man whose fear drove him to destroy his world and create a new one. I want to thank you guys very much for watching. I know this is a little different to the type of content I would normally do on this channel, and I know it will probably only cater to my Xenoblade fans, but that's fine. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.